One of the critical aspects of biology is where it actually fits in terms of our overall lives. And there are sometimes misconceptions about how biology interacts with us and our various belief systems. And so this slide illustrates some of this. Obviously, there are quite a few belief systems. And whether you are a believer in one system or another or in none, you have to acknowledge that they exist. And what I want to do is give you an introduction to how science and faith differ and why really neither one can threaten the other. They're both important, and we just have to understand how they operate. Now, if you look at the top of the slide here where I present you some symbols, these are what we might consider major religious systems, major belief systems. And then at the bottom there are some additional ones which are not as well known perhaps, or perhaps they don't have specific symbols associated with them. That doesn't mean that they're unimportant, they are just another set of belief systems. And if you just do a basic count of these, so in the top row you have 8, in the bottom you have 7, that's 15 significant belief systems, and then you have science. Now that all in itself tells you something about science. When you look at how science operates, and we look at how knowledge is derived via the scientific method, then you very quickly realize that it's very different from ideas that we derive from faith. Now notice, I say different. There's no judgment in terms of which is better, which is worse. They are there for a reason. They all provide us knowledge. It's just different how they operate. And so let's consider science. When you look at scientific evidence or models or data, then what you do is you look at a problem that exists in nature and you try and make sense of it based on observations that are tangible. Something that you can observe, something that you can repeat, an experiment that you can set up, something that you can touch and feel. Those are the kind of things that produce data in science. And when you take all the data together, you come up eventually, and sometimes that takes a while, you come up with a single block of knowledge. If you consider some of the very big principles of our lives, the sun rises in the east. Well, that's clearly something we can demonstrate. I mean, get up early in the morning, and where does the sun come up? It comes up in the east. And yet, people weren't quite sure how that worked for a while. They thought, in the olden days, that the sun was drawn across the sky by a large chariot, and that's just what happened. Now, we know that that's not how it actually happens. But back then, that's what people believed. Similarly, there were belief systems that told us that the earth was flat. There were belief systems that told us that the sun revolves around the earth. And when somebody eventually said that that was not the case, it was actually the other way around, that the earth was not the center of our solar system, but the sun was the center and all the planets revolved around it, that put them in some serious opposition with their faith system. Nowadays, I don't think anybody seriously has any problem with understanding that the earth revolves around the sun. That's just the way it is, and science has shown this. But it sometimes takes a while to figure out what's really truth. And so we have this interesting juxtaposition between science and faith systems, where science, everything eventually distills down to a single block of knowledge, whereas in faith you'll find that there are generally competing and not only competing, but mutually exclusive concepts about how things work or how things run or what society is like and so on and so forth. So they're different. They act in our lives very differently, and that is simply something we have to understand and accept. It's not that one is bad and one is good, it's just that they are fundamentally different. And so when it comes to working within the scientific method, that is a method that goes beyond any particular belief system. It is something universal in scope, which means that no matter what faith you are, or what kind of system, belief system you hold, you can agree on science. And if people gather the data and look at it and they come to a conclusion, then they will realize, oh yeah, that's how it works. And we see this again and again when it comes to chemistry, when it comes to mathematics, when it comes to physics, and of course biology, that if we just follow the evidence, then we get to a single answer. So the scientific method is one way of doing things. It doesn't matter what language you speak, what color or creed you are, it doesn't matter what kind of belief system you hold, it all distills down to a single block of knowledge. Faiths have a very different approach. There are many methods. Some of these methods are limited in scope. They don't deal with everything that's out there. They deal with specific rules or specific social norms and so on. And many of these, if you look at the 15 that are displayed here, are highly localized geographically. You will find them in one corner of the world and not any other corner. And science is therefore fundamentally different. So I don't want to tell you that it's not right to have faith. Quite the contrary. I think faith is something that's very important to many of us. But it is something that's so fundamentally different from science that the two don't really interact. So you can't use a faith-based approach to understand nature in the same way that science would allow you to do it. Science works only with facts. And that is, of course, why ultimately data derived from science are the ones that allow us to work as CSIs, where we gather the evidence, we follow the evidence, and then we reach a conviction. We find the perpetrator and we can use the evidence to convict the person. That is what science allows us to do. It's not hearsay, it's fact, and only fact. And so while there is a lot of important information out there in the realm of faith, it really ultimately cannot penetrate the secrets of nature the way science can. Now, science doesn't have all the answers. And this is also something to remember. Science does not have all the answers. But we're getting more answers all the time. Faith also doesn't have all the answers. One of the questions you might ask yourself is, why are there so many faiths? Right? And so there may also not be all the answers. There may be a lot of answers, but not all of them. So we should treasure both science and faith, if we subscribe to a faith, and we should allow these two to exist and understand how they exist and understand how they work. But when it comes to interactions between the two, we should just be careful in how we make that approach. The two don't really impinge on one another. And so it's one thing to understand, and it's very important. When I talk to you about the scientific area, which is what this class is about, I'm going to set faith aside. It's going to be something that does not have an influence on what I'm talking about, because everything I talk about is going to be something derived by the scientific method, which means it's going to involve facts only. And so I make a long introduction to this, because otherwise sometimes I feel that there could be misunderstandings. And when it comes to the controversy, where you sometimes have scientific evidence apparently contravene something that a faith may state, it's a mix that simply doesn't work. And so let's celebrate these independently and simply go with what each one can give us, but make sure that science only is done in the scientific method way. So that's basically what I want to say about this particular slide. I know it's a lot for a single slide, but I find it's very important to give something like that to you.